It happened last fall when I was driving to visit a buddy who lived out in the boonies upstate. It was a gloomy day and had just rained cats and dogs. The whole countryside was engulfed in fog as thick as pea soup. At first, the road wasn't too bad. I could see maybe 100 feet ahead. Trees and fields emerged and disappeared in the haze. I drove along, taking in the melancholy autumn sunset. About an hour later, the highway narrowed and everything around grew more lonesome. I was far from the interstate now. Once in a while a car would whoosh by. I checked the GPS less than 20 minutes to my destination. But then the fog thickened up real quick. I could barely see beyond the hood of my ride. For safety's sake, I pulled over to wait for the fog to clear up before rolling on. I parked on the shoulder, killed the engine but kept the lights on so other cars wouldn't T-bone me. Soon the dense fog obscured my whole car. Visibility dropped to just 10 feet max. It was dead silent except for some rustling in the bushes. After some 15 minutes, the fog showed no sign of letting up. I decided to give my buddy a holler to give him a heads up I'd be late. But just as I was dialing, I noticed a shadowy figure pacing in front of my ride not far ahead. My heartbeat spiked in a jiffy. I hung up by reflex and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The figure was just a blurry shadow, indiscernible in the fog. But no doubt it was a person, a living human being pacing in front of my car. I locked the doors right away, watching the shadow warily. Maybe he was also stuck in the fog, waiting for it to clear like yours truly. But the pacing seemed whack. A normal Joe would just stand put. This shadow roamed back and forth. I felt spooked but couldn't pinpoint why. Bumping into someone else in zero visibility wasn't odd. But my gut told me something was off. His presence and behavior gave me the heebie-jeebies for no clear reason. After a few minutes, the shadow halted pacing and stood stock still, facing my car. Now I was dead certain this wasn't kosher. I deliberated whether to vamoose, but the terrible visibility made driving hazardous. I didn't know his intentions either. Eventually, I decided to stay put, doors locked, keeping an eye on the man. A few more minutes passed. The man slowly moved toward my ride, disappearing into the fog around the front. All of a sudden, a face appeared smack outside my window. I nearly jumped out of my skin, barely choking back a scream. He stood inches away, gawking right at me. His face was pasty white. His baby blues bored into mine like a dead man's. I was scared stiff and tried to skedaddle. He slapped his palm on my window, mouthing something. I couldn't make it out, but he kept repeating a word. Probably help or save me. But I was paralyzed by fear now, dead set on one thing: make tracks. I cranked the wheel, stomping on the gas. The man banged the window twice before vanishing into the fog. I drove for what seemed like forever until I got to a wider street lit up with street lamps. Only then did I start to chill. The man was likely just a passerby who saw my parked car and thought I needed a hand. But his freaky look scared me out of my wits, so I hightailed it like a bat out of hell. On second thought, I decided to give the local sheriff's station near the country road a jingle to report the incident, just in case. The officer on duty listened and said there were missing persons cases in Foggy, whether they're in the past, but no one had gone missing recently. I was probably just spooked by those old tales, which is why the man seemed fishy. I thanked him, but still felt rattled to the core. That man's face was seared into my brain, especially his pasty pallor and piercing stare. My gut told me he was no harmless passerby. Anytime it gets foggy now, I think back to that spine-chilling encounter in the mist. Though I dodged whatever evil was lurking, the truth probably still hangs in the fog. Last summer, my buddy Jack and I planned a camping trip out in the boonies to relax and get close to nature, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. We just finished freshman year of college and wanted to make the most of our hard-earned vacation. After planning, we chose a beautiful camping spot in the woods, with some sweet views of the countryside. We got all the gear ahead of time, hoping to stay there for 3 days and 2 nights, soaking up the serenity of Mother Nature. On the first day, we easily got to the campsite. The weather was gorgeous, birds chirping, everything seemed perfect. We happily set up our tent on a flat grass patch and collected firewood, preparing to light a crackling bonfire at sunset. As the sun went down, the woods gradually darkened. We lit the fire, grilled up hot dogs, corn, s'mores while drinking beer and chatting, enjoying the rare leisurely time. This place was far from the city, and we could see amazing starry skies at night. Just as we were deep in conversation, a thick fog suddenly rolled in. We stopped talking as visibility dropped sharply, everything turning hazy. We figured it was just a brief weather change and decided to wait for the fog to clear up. But 2 hours passed, and the fog didn't thin out at all. In fact, it got denser. We realized something was off and we had to find a way out. We hiked in earlier along a trail, but with visibility this poor, wandering the woods could easily get us lost. Just as we were debating whether to risk leaving, some rustling sounded in the bushes up ahead. We jumped, quickly flashing a light toward the sound. The beam cut through the thick fog, only lighting up the swaying tree shadows. "Probably just some critters," Jack said, though he sounded uncertain. I nodded but felt uneasy. We decided to wait another half hour and leave if the fog remained heavy. Right then, more shuffling, like footsteps, sounded not far behind us. We whipped around, flashing the light toward it. But nothing was there, only endless fog. Jack and I exchanged a look, both seeing the fear in each other's eyes. Now we were certain those weren't animal sounds, but human footsteps. What kind of person would be lurking in the woods in this weather? What could they be up to? Paranoid thoughts popped into my mind. "We need to get out of here," Jack said firmly. I nodded again. The unknown threat seemed far scarier than getting lost in the woods. Just as we hurriedly packed up to leave, the footsteps sounded again, even closer this time. "Hurry!" I urged, my voice shaking. We grabbed our bags and flashlight, moving swiftly but cautiously toward the trailhead. I prayed nothing would leap from the fog. Finally, we emerged from the trees onto a slightly wider dirt trail, both breathing a sigh of relief. But just then, more shuffling sounded right behind us, as if someone was on our heels. We were horrified. Abandoning our gear, we broke into a mad dash. The footsteps sped up too, pursuing us closely. We ran like maniacs, terrified something would pounce from the fog any second. At last, when the village lights came into view, we were beyond exhausted but so relieved. Seems whatever it was had only followed us to the forest edge. We called the cops and learned locals had gone missing mysteriously in foggy weather. The police suspected a suspect from those past cases was still at large. We swore to never camp out when foggy again. No telling what evil lurked in that endless white void, and we had no intention of finding out. Just thinking of that harrowing chase still gives me the chills. We likely barely escaped becoming that sinister fog's next target. I'm a white-collar worker living in the city with a hectic job. 2 years ago, during a weekend, I drove to a lakeside cabin in the countryside for a solo vacation, hoping to enjoy some much-needed alone time. It was a Saturday morning when I got up bright and early, packed up and hit the road. My long-awaited solo getaway had finally arrived. I could temporarily escape the hustle and bustle of the city and unwind at a peaceful lakeside cabin in the boonies. After driving for about 2 hours, I came to a quiet country road lined with trees on both sides. Occasionally, I could see some fancy country cottages. I knew I was close to my destination, so I slowed down to savor the serene countryside views. At a bend, I could vaguely see a lake up ahead. I knew my lakeside cabin wasn't far away. At that moment, wisps of white fog started rising from the lake surface and soon enveloped the entire lake. I was a tad surprised since the weather forecast didn't say anything about fog today. Before I knew it, my car was immersed in thick fog, and all the surroundings vanished instantly into the white mist. My heart skipped a beat. Though it was the countryside, it wasn't completely uninhabited. What bothered me more was that I wasn't familiar with the roads around here. Even if something happened, I doubt I could get help in time. I didn't dare continue driving, afraid I might accidentally plunge into the lake by the road. So I could only park at the roadside in the woods and wait for the fog to clear. The surroundings were spacious and silent. Occasionally, I could hear birds and bugs in the woods and the rustling of leaves. I zipped up my jacket as the fog significantly lowered the temperature. I checked my phone only to find very poor signal here. I couldn't even locate my position. This was not looking good. I could only wait for the fog to clear. I hoped it would pass soon since the weather forecast didn't mention anything about fog today. I waited in the car for about half an hour. But instead of clearing, the fog only grew denser. I became restless and started pacing back and forth in the car. Just then I heard a loud crash from the distant lake, as if someone had fallen into the water. I looked around in horror at the lake shore, but I couldn't see anything except the thick fog lingering around me. "Hello? Anyone there?" I shouted, only hearing my own echo. It was dead silent around. It seemed I was just being paranoid. Nonetheless, I became even more agitated. I decided to still try to move my car slowly. So I drove up the road carefully. Though visibility was extremely poor ahead, as long as I drove slowly, it should be fine. As I drove, I gently stepped on the gas while observing the trees on both sides intently, afraid I might hit them inadvertently. When night fell, the trees on both sides of the road turned into blurry black shadows, looking creepy and obscure. Just then, I vaguely saw a black human-shaped shadow ahead by the roadside. I slammed the brakes and stopped at a fork in the road. I was terrified and looked around in panic but didn't see anything. Maybe it was just the tree shadows playing tricks on me. I took a deep breath to calm myself down. Just then, I saw a tall dark figure dart quickly through the woods and disappear into the thick fog. My eyes widened in fear, afraid it was the sinister lord of these eerie woods. I locked the car doors and dared not continue. I waited in the car for hours, hoping the fog would clear faster. In the dead of night, the fog finally thinned out a bit for me to barely make out the road ahead. I knew I couldn't keep staying in this creepy place and had to find my way home. I restarted the car and drove up onto the road. Just then, in the rearview mirror, I saw a tall shadowy figure following not far behind my car. My heart tightened as I slammed the gas pedal. Luckily, there were few other cars on this road, so I could speed ahead at full force. I checked the rearview mirror periodically to make sure the creepy figure didn't catch up. The figure gradually disappeared from the mirror, and I felt slightly relieved. Just then, an enormous shadow leaped out suddenly from the bushes towards my car. I screamed and jerked the steering wheel hard. The car swerved off-road, barely avoiding collision with that thing. My car crashed straight into the woods and hit a large tree. I was scared pale, immediately checking that I wasn't seriously injured. Fortunately, I only had minor abrasions and the car wasn't critically damaged either. I didn't bother checking what that shadow was, but flung the door open and fled desperately into the woods. I kept running blindly, fearing the shadow might catch me. Only when I was sure it didn't follow me did I stop to catch my breath. I found a bush to hide in. As it was already late, I didn't dare move anymore. I sat hugging my legs in the bushes, keeping alert for any sound. I didn't sleep at all that night. At daybreak, I carefully headed in the direction I believed was right. Luckily, I soon found a small path leading to the highway. I heaved a sigh of relief and immediately sought help at the nearest rest stop, as well as contacted the police. Upon investigation, there indeed had been a series of bizarre disappearance cases near that road. As for those eerie figures I encountered, they might be related to the disappearances. However, the truth still remains a mystery. Whenever I think back on that foggy, desolate road in the woods, chills run down my spine. I swear I'll never go to such an uninhabited place alone again.